Israel has formally launched its major ground offensive on Gaza City, marking one of the most intense phases of the war that began nearly 2 years ago. The operation is intended to dismantle Hamas's military infrastructure, secure tunnel networks, and pressure for the release of remaining hostages. Brigadier General Efi Defrin confirmed that Israeli troops are pushing into the outskirts of Gaza City, supported by extensive aerial and artillery strikes. The campaign, however, comes at a time when Israel's military is showing visible signs of fatigue after extended operations, raising questions about whether it has the manpower to sustain such an ambitious undertaking. To reinforce its forces, Israel has announced the mobilization of about 60,000 reservists while extending the service of 20,000 active-duty soldiers. This represents one of the largest call-ups in decades for a country with a relatively small population. The deployment is expected to take shape in September, with tens of thousands of troops being integrated into units already operating across Gaza. Military analysts describe the move as necessary to mount a decisive assault on Gaza City, long considered Hamas's political and military capital. Yet, such mobilization places a massive strain on Israel's society and economy, pulling citizens away from jobs, families, and daily life to serve in one of the world's most intense conflict zones. Despite the reinforcement, the Israel Defense Forces face a mounting crisis of morale and manpower shortages. Nearly 2 years of war have left many soldiers exhausted, leading to falling turnout rates among reservists. Reports suggest that reservist attendance in some units has fallen to less than 50%. Many soldiers have already served hundreds of days, far longer than they expected, placing extraordinary stress on their families and civilian careers. Some describe this as a phenomenon of quiet refusal, where individuals do not openly defy orders but simply fail to report for duty. This trend signals a deeper social fatigue that military planners cannot easily solve with legislation or extended duty calls. The military itself has acknowledged a significant shortfall in personnel. Senior officers recently admitted that the IDF is missing around 7,500 soldiers, including nearly 300 platoon commanders, a gap that directly impacts operational efficiency. This admission is rare for a military that prides itself on strength and readiness. The shortage of junior officers is especially troubling in an urban warfare environment like Gaza City, where small unit leadership is critical to navigating dense neighborhoods, tunnels, and house-to-house combat. Without enough trained commanders, even the infusion of thousands of additional soldiers may not provide the cohesion needed for sustained success. The human cost of these deployments is weighing heavily on Israeli society. Families of reservists have been vocal about the burden of repeated call-ups, and protests have emerged across the country. Many demonstrators, including families of hostages still held by Hamas, are demanding a ceasefire instead of escalation. Critics argue that the government's strategy risks prolonging the conflict without achieving a clear resolution, while deepening domestic division. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu continues to insist that the operation is essential for Israel's security and survival, but his position faces opposition even within segments of the military establishment who fear the costs outweigh the potential gains. Internationally, the Gaza City offensive has drawn swift condemnation. The United Nations has urged Israel to halt the campaign, warning that it will trigger mass civilian displacement and a catastrophic humanitarian crisis. Aid agencies note that hundreds of thousands of residents cannot realistically relocate, as Israel has advised, because southern Gaza lacks the infrastructure to absorb them. Food, medicine, and shelter are already in critically short supply, and further displacement risks overwhelming any remaining humanitarian support networks. European governments and regional actors like Jordan have also criticized Israel's strategy, warning that it is undermining the possibility of peace and destabilizing the wider Middle East. On the ground, Gaza City is bracing for some of the most destructive urban warfare of the conflict. Residents report constant bombardments, while the Israeli military has issued repeated evacuation warnings. Hamas fighters are believed to be deeply entrenched within a vast tunnel network, prepared for a drawn-out fight. Israeli officials argue that these tunnels, along with Hamas's command structures, must be destroyed to weaken the group permanently. However, military experts caution that urban warfare in Gaza's dense terrain could cost Israel dearly in manpower, equipment, and international legitimacy, even if it succeeds militarily in the short term. The strategic stakes are immense. For Israel, seizing Gaza City would symbolize a decisive blow against Hamas, potentially altering the trajectory of the war. But the cost of maintaining control over such a densely populated and hostile environment could drain the military for years. The longer Israeli troops are tied down in Gaza, the greater the strain on its reserve system and the more fragile domestic support may become. Already, the conflict has exposed deep fissures in Israeli society between those demanding security at any cost and those calling for negotiations and de-escalation. Ultimately, Israel's Gaza City offensive is both a military gamble and a political risk. The operation's success depends not only on the strength of its soldiers but also on the resilience of its society and its ability to manage international fallout. The manpower problem is not simply about numbers, it reflects the limits of a small nation sustaining a prolonged war, the psychological toll on its people, and the political choices of its leaders. As the offensive unfolds, the question is less whether Israel can enter Gaza City and more whether it can hold it without exhausting the very forces it relies upon. The coming weeks will determine if this campaign delivers a strategic victory or becomes a turning point that exposes the limits of Israel's military power in the face of unrelenting resistance and global scrutiny.